So I know that I'm the only thing that stands between you and a good cup of coffee. So I will make it as short as you can bear, I hope. So I couldn't have asked for a better introduction into the topics that we are talking about in this summer school or symposium. What I'm going to talk about myself is what types of infrastructures do we need to actually enable some of the cost reductions Dr. Matthews talked about. He showed you a number of innovations in the area of sensors that allow us to reduce healthcare costs, but the amount of data that will be generated by these sensors and the amount of data that will be generated by future, let's say, genomic sequencing that will also contribute to your health record is just staggering and will require completely new infrastructures that allow us to actually centralize, for instance, the health records, as we heard in the previous presentation. I'm also straddling two things now because on the one hand side, yes, I'm a professor in the computer science department on sabbatical, so I get to relax where others get distressed. And at the same time, we have spun out a company called LonoCloud that tries to bring products to market in the very area that Dr. Matthews described earlier, but particularly focused on creating software infrastructures that allow us in the long run to save health, to reduce healthcare costs and increase the nature of participatory healthcare that you can actually get because your data is available to the healthcare providers as it needs to be. So what I'm going to talk about is really what type of infrastructures do we need, what do we prototype today, what do they look like if we are building healthcare infrastructures, what are the requirements for these kinds of healthcare infrastructures that we actually need to address besides having great sensors that deliver the data, and what can we do and how can we commercialize this. So one of the reasons for spinning this out, obviously, is to have this commercialized and to ensure that we can actually compete with other products out there. And I'll talk a little bit about what we do with LonoCloud. So, and healthcare systems are nothing if not large-scale systems. And I'll talk about this in a few minutes. But what do we need from the research side? I mean, we want many of you also to become great researchers. But in addition to being successful in the marketplace, so what do we need from the research side? What problems do we have to solve here at the university in the academic environment as much as we do in the commercial environment? And so one of the key elements that we have to solve is how to integrate systems of systems. You saw in the very interesting videos, especially in the airline video, that integration is one of the big barriers in health systems today. I mean, you go to your local care physician, and they may even just have paper records of you. Okay? So how on earth could somebody else know that you are allergic to a particular medication, which, when you're actually carried by an ambulance to the hospital, and that particular medication needs to be administered, may be vital information. Okay? So what we want to do, ultimately, with the research that we are conducting is to enable integration at a scale that is unprecedented today. Okay? Integration of software systems, integration of workflows that happen at your local physician, that happen at your hospital, in the emergency room, in the urgent care department, and all of that integrated with the insurance companies, with the medical groups. And each of these have their own workflows, meaning the steps they process or the steps they take in sequence to process your data and make decisions about your life. And all of these are very different systems that need to be integrated to arrive at an integrated healthcare solution as we want to see it today. Okay? And so what we do on the research side, in the basic researches, we build models of the various application domains that we are actually servicing with our systems. We understand what services are so that they can be composed and ultimately become features of your software solutions, of your overall end-to-end systems that we're building. And we do this in health, we do this in energy, and we do this in cyber-physical systems. So these are the big three areas that we are targeting on the research side. The top, if you will, is applied research, where we're actually building systems, and I'll talk about a few of the systems that we are building, as much as we do basic research in trying to figure out how better to build these kinds of systems. Okay? And so, one quote that actually talks about ultra-large scale systems, and you can find this on Wikipedia, but also in research publications. Health IT systems push far beyond the size of today's systems and systems of systems by every measure. The number of lines of code, the number of people employing the system for different purposes. We would call these people stakeholders, okay? Because everybody has a stake either in the success or failure of your system. Okay? That's what a stakeholder is. And so the amount of data stored, accessed, manipulated, and refined, the number of connections and interdependencies among software components, and the number of hardware elements. Okay? So what I've done is basically I've taken this part, which talks about ultra-large scale systems, independent of healthcare, and just have replaced the definition of health IT system, because it fits like a glove. Okay? This is really the challenge. As a systems integrator, as a systems engineer, you have to solve. Okay? To deal with these ultra-large scale systems while doing all the wonderful things that we want to do for healthcare. And one of the goals of a symposium like this is also to alert you to the fact that no individual discipline on this campus can solve any of these problems alone. Okay? That's why this is an interdisciplinary institute and a center, and because the problems we have to face, that the really big problems in our society are always interdisciplinary problems. Okay? And so events like these try to bring you together to meet with your peers in other disciplines and ask the question, what can we achieve if we work together? Where can we go next where we individually cannot go today? Okay? So the main takeaway points that I want to make are Cyberinfrastructures, and I'll tell you a little bit what they are the platforms for modern research and applications in healthcare. You cannot build a comprehensive healthcare solution without a sophisticated IT backend behind it. Okay? Simply because the data is too large, the privacy concerns are too severe, and the scalability you need is so dramatic that you cannot accomplish this without a substantial cyber infrastructure or infrastructure backend for your software systems. That's a key element. Imagine what we're doing here in San Diego affects maybe 2.5 people. Okay? So you have to build, if you want to build a regional system here for 2.5 million people. You know, in California, if you want to integrate up and down the coast, you have to do this for 70 million people. Then you go countrywide, you have over 270 million people, and then you go international, you have quite a bit on your hands. Okay? And all of this data needs to be interchangeable, and so you need this kind of cyber infrastructure to actually be successful. The healthcare domain has a very demanding requirements profile. You have to be highly flexible in terms of the solutions you provide, because diseases change. You have to react more quickly than ever before for some of the outbreaks we see. You have to be able to integrate lots and lots of different devices. I mean, what we see in terms of medical devices is just the tip of the iceberg. This will just explode exponentially in terms of what you can see. Look at what we've seen in terms of the tattoos, which I just found spectacular. Okay? This is something that you can give a kid, okay, who otherwise wouldn't wear a sensor or would tear it off while they're climbing the slide. Okay? You have to deal with fluidity of data and information in general. because otherwise you cannot solve the cost problem. If everybody has to do every test, every form, and so on and so forth, you will just increase and not decrease the healthcare costs. You have to deal with scale, I mentioned this. You have to deal with policy-based information assurance. This is something that was alluded to in the talk with the pizza guy. Okay? There is information that you want transmitted in the case of an emergency. Okay? You don't care if the pizza guy has it, if otherwise you die. Okay? But in regular scenarios, you have to be able to trust that your ailment is not held against you. Okay? When you try to buy insurance, or when you try to, perform some activity like have the double meat pizza. Okay? So, and this has to do with policy. Policy means here making statements, setting rules of where your information can go, and who has rightfully access to this information, and who can actually alter the rules that set up the rightful access. Okay? You have to deal with availability. It doesn't do you any good if you're completely instrumented. But in the most important moment, when you're about to have a heart attack, the cellular network is down. Okay? Or you have a power outage, okay? Which most of us have experienced, hopefully in a positive way. I saw as many kids as I've never seen on our street that afternoon, okay? Because all the Wii's and Xboxes weren't functional, and so they had to do something outside. I was excited. So, yeah, people went outside, had barbecues with their neighbors. This was fantastic. Cost effectiveness is what Dr. Matthews talked about. And I'll mention briefly an architecture pattern that we've developed over the last few years that helps deliver on these promises and reduce costs at the same time. And then I'll talk briefly about the business that we are entering with Lono Cloud, where we want to have all of these traits in a cloud-level deployment. And since you saw some numbers earlier from Dr. Matthews, how much would you say from a typical IT budget? You're working at a company, and your company has a budget for IT spending, okay? Development and so on and so forth. How much of that would you say goes into innovation, and how much of that goes into maintenance and just keeping your applications alive?
95%.
What are the numbers? 80% goes into what?
Into maintenance.
Yeah, you're very close. 75% goes into maintenance, okay, and keeping your systems alive, and 25% at the maximum goes into innovation. Okay? And so this is an enormous amount. And this is true for healthcare as well. I mean, all of the healthcare systems that are out there already that don't really talk to each other, that communicate poorly, that don't interact, you have to maintain those with 75% of your budget. And you only have 25% to do something that could possibly connect them. Okay? And so that is something that we have to overcome, that we have to change to actually lower the healthcare costs. Okay? So basically what I'll talk about next is just a few words about cyber infrastructure. They're not genuine to healthcare. We're building or helping build basically a cyber infrastructure for ocean sciences. And it's actually quite an interesting project to explain what a cyber infrastructure is. And then I'll match this to the requirements that we find in healthcare and tell you maybe one of the examples that we are employing these healthcare cyber infrastructures on. One is called CitySense. It equips bicycle riders with a sensor package so that they can sense air quality while they're moving about San Diego, and then communicate the sensor information via a wireless backend to our IT system, so that we can basically learn what the air quality in San Diego really is. And we're signing up people for studies right now. So this is something that you may actually want to consider if you are bicycle riders. Okay? Another one is Psycor, where we're working with post-cancer treatment patients who have gone through the care at the hospital, have had parts of their throat removed, have parts of their other body parts removed, have to go back in their homes and perform exercises to regain control of their lives. And this may mean being able to swallow a glass of water, okay? Because they have to train how to swallow again, okay? Very difficult for them, very difficult for their caregivers to monitor whether they are performing the exercises well and so on and so forth. And we're working with a group of physicians at MD Anderson Cancer Center where we're building sensor systems, and Phil Rios here is one of the principals on the project who are helping to build the sensor infrastructure. Okay? So if you need further information, he has all the details. So this is another system where we help understand through sensing in environments where people are not used to IT. Okay? These are people who will get out of bed and will trip over the carpet, okay? Because they're elderly, they have other ailments, okay? Which prevent them from being iPadized and iPhoneized and BlackBerry, okay? So the people who have all these information technologies available, they are the easy targets. The ones who suffer are much more difficult, and bringing technologies in their lives is a whole other challenge. Okay? So these are two projects out of a larger range, and I'll probably have time to talk about one at the most. But this is basically why we are creating these systems, because there's a lot of data that physicians today cannot even access. You saw the heart pacers implanted. There are about 4 or 5 major heart pacer manufacturers, okay, in the world. Now each of them has their own data systems to collect information, and a physician has patients that have implants from all of these different suppliers. Okay? So they could get to the data if they only could remember all the 4 passwords to get into the manufacturer systems to acquire the data, which they can't because they have to bill by the second. Okay? So they have to have 10 patients in an hour rather than just 1. And so these are all barriers to adoption of healthcare innovations, but we have to overcome these, and we will overcome these because the cost drivers don't give us another chance. Okay? So all of this comes together, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we do. So cyber infrastructures are basically IT backbones that enable the ingestion of data, the processing of data, and the distribution of this data to interested and authorized parties and eligible parties, so that new information can be created, processed, and fed back into the system, so that we have a wealth of data that can be acted on in meaningful ways. And we have built this in the process of building this for cyber infrastructures for ocean observing systems. And you can imagine that today, and this is very much like in the healthcare domain, if an investigator, an ocean scientist goes out into the ocean to study what the ocean looks like, they will board a ship and then they maybe go out here. And then they know exactly what happens here. But as we all know, the ocean is a little bit of a bigger place. Okay? And the ocean has a lot of impact on climate. It has a lot of impact on our well-being. Now, I can't even enumerate everything, but carbon cycling, for instance, a lot of the carbon that we exhaust into the air is actually sequestered later in the ocean, where it sits for a while and then comes back up. Okay? So there's a carbon cycle that has a huge impact on our individual lives through climate and other factors. Okay? And so today we understand this in a very localized fashion. Tomorrow we want to have a big picture view on larger swaths of the ocean through mobile assets that go through the ocean and sense and then relay their data back to the shore, where it then is distributed all over the country and ultimately the world. And so what we need here are really IT systems that allow distribution of this data in a timely fashion to researchers who haven't even conceived of the mobile device that goes into the ocean. So we want people who are eager ocean scientists in Nebraska, for instance, to operate assets that have been put in place by the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And we have to solve how we can authorize these people to actually do this, and how we build these people to do this, and how we distribute the data they generate, how we clean up the data, and so on and so forth. And so because we have to tackle all of these challenges, we decided to create this for not only for the ocean sciences, but as a platform that also benefits other vertical industries, if you will, such as healthcare, such as cyber-physical systems, so we work a lot in automotive as well. But the challenge here, among other things, is that we have to build this over a period of 5 years, knowing that the system will exist for 25 years. Okay? So it's not the typical iPad app cycle that we're talking about here, which you buy and then you throw away after half a month. Okay? Because the next app is already there. The platform that runs ocean sciences will have to exist for the next 25 to 30 years. And as a software and system architect, you have to provision for that. Okay? Knowing that none of the technologies you're building the architecture with will survive 5 years. Okay? So you have to focus on putting in place an architecture that can carry a system like this for 25 years, whereas all the technologies underneath will change every 5 to 10 years, okay, depending on what you're looking at. Okay? So this is an additional element of the challenge. So now going to the healthcare cyber infrastructures, where we have very similar challenges actually as in the ocean sciences. Long-lived systems, high data rates, increasing data rates, large amounts of costs in IT, and at the same time we have all these opportunities with cloud infrastructure that we can harvest if only we could actually create systems that took advantage of them. And I mean, you saw the pictures with a little bit of cloud there. Unless you design your systems for the cloud, they're not running on the cloud. Okay? So Dr. Matthews mentioned Apple. They are putting their infrastructure on the cloud because they are designing their systems for the cloud. If you, as an application developer, don't design your system for the cloud, you're not on the cloud. Okay? So and this is a key element. So I'll make this very quick because we saw this in other form in Dr. Matthews' presentation, but part of the picture here is that you have traditional paper-based providers of healthcare that have simple health records. You have those who are already on electronic health records, EHRs, and you have your medical groups who are determining whether you actually will get that heart pacer. Okay, so this is an interesting interplay between those who want to provide the care and those who have to pay for it and then make decisions that affect your life or death. Okay? And then you have IT research, whether it's academic or corporate, and somewhere out here you have the patient who unfortunately has to effectively deal with all of these different entities. And the story here is that silos in this processing lead to waste and missed opportunities for care. Okay? If you don't know that somebody needs the care, you can't give the care. You can't, provide this data out of thin air. You have to be able to connect and overcome the silos. Okay? Now, the simplified future, I mean, it's much more involved than this comic that I'm showing you right now. But the simplified future is that there is, in fact, a centralized understanding of, if it were only regionalized, we would be happy already, but a centralized understanding of where your health information is. It will sit in many places, not just one, but it will be in some way, shape, or form accessible by the patient themselves, so that the patient gets some feedback about their health as well, but also by all these different providers so that an integrated view on healthcare can actually be accomplished. And I want to encourage you to look up an article by Dr. Leroy Hood in the Newsweek of July 13th, 2009, where he advocates the goal for healthcare is to be predictive, personalized, preventive, and participatory. Okay? That's really the 4 P's of healthcare that we have to arrive at to lower the cost, to engage the patient in the process, and to make sure that we actually can render the healthcare the person needs. Not some person, not a statistic person, but the person in front of the physician today. Okay? So Dr. Leroy Hood, if you need another engineering leader to look up, he is certainly one who would deserve your time. Okay? So the patient will then be able to participate in this, and this will not be in one place, as I said earlier, it will be in multiple different places, but they will be interconnected, and we have to design the systems to allow this to happen. Okay? Now, what does it take to build a system like this? What are the requirements we have to accomplish or accommodate to make it happen? We have to solve ingestion of data. This is what Dr. Matthews said. You know, you have multiple different providers, they have different data formats, or they have different communications protocols, and so on and so forth. But you, as a provider in this space, you have to handle data ingest in multiple different formats. This means you have to create multiple different integration platforms or adapters to all the different healthcare systems. Okay? So there are people who want to make money out there, and they have siloed healthcare and health record systems. And the way they make their money is by selling it to, you know, a Kaiser Permanente or Sharp. And then their incentive is not that you make it easier to communicate with another system, right? Because then they can't sell theirs anymore, possibly. But still, you have to write these adapters, and it's a hard business to be in today. The providers need portals, inlets into the systems. Then internally, you have to solve data distribution, data transformation, information assurance, okay, so that the data is secure, safe, and cannot be altered unless it is authorized, and so you don't expose the patient to risk of compromised data, basically. There's an area that many of you won't have experience with, but it's very important actually in the medical field, and that is consent management. So when you go to a healthcare provider, you fill out a form. Okay? You go tomorrow again, you fill the same form out again because they forgot it. Who knows whether you have consented to them handling your information. Okay? They don't know. Another healthcare provider certainly doesn't know that you ever have consented. But it's a huge deal. If you don't know whether somebody has consented to something, by law you have to find that information. Now, if the person is in dire shape, it's not so easy to obtain. Okay? So another thing is what is called the Master Patient Index. If you get your healthcare mainly in San Diego, but then you travel somewhere else and you fall ill, they need to be able to find you somewhere. Okay? To understand whether you are actually allergic to the medication they are desperately trying to administer. So you need a master patient index so that you're known, that you are a known entity wherever you go. And this goes hand in hand with a patient record locator, so that even if there are different systems that you're working on or known in, you can locate the health record. Okay? And then you have to build a system that detects health events. So let's say you have been to 5 different doctors, and each of them has scribbled something into your health record. And if only somebody were to combine the information across these 5 doctors and then would alert a 3rd or a 6th doctor and say, look, this person actually likely has this disease. Okay? None of the others was able to find it because they looked at something else. But if you combine the information from those 5, we can create an event, and we can notify the patient and another physician of the event, and then they can be taken care of. Okay? I mentioned workflow briefly. So the systems need workflow authoring and execution, and we need health analytics and intervention. So what we do in a variety of different projects is actually build systems that fulfill these various different requirements. And I'll show you 2, just so that you get a feeling for what these are. There are many other requirements, but they have to do with standards organizations, they have to do with law, they have to do with ethics, and all of them are very important. You have to design them into these architectures to make any sense of them. So the CitySense project basically tries to give these sensor packages to active people, let's say Bob the runner in this case, who carries a pollution sensor or air quality sensor and a cell phone. The cell phone will receive the data from the sensor package and will then transmit it into the IT system, the CitySense system, which can then notify Bob of the pollution levels on the routes he's running. But because he's asthmatic, he has to stay away from areas where that aggravate his condition. And so the backend system uses data analytics or uses information from his health record to actually send a reroute to Bob within 30 to 60 seconds. So this is one of the systems that we're currently in the process of building that gives feedback to the individual not to go into areas where they're negatively impacted on their health. One of the systems we're building. The other one is Cycor. I mentioned it briefly. Here, patients in their home care treatment after cancer, major cancer surgery or treatment, they get home environment sensors. Sometimes we use smoking detectors, because if there's a cancer caused by excessive smoking and the people continue to smoke, they aggravate it again, and then that's not fun. Then we use blood pressure monitors, heart rate monitors, blood oxygenation monitors, and they go via various physical interfaces into a system Phil has developed that takes receipt of all the sensor data and passes this on to the Cycor backend infrastructure, which allows a number of different stakeholders then to access the data and produce derivative information from the data through data mining, analysis tools, or set policies who can change the data, who can see the data. And all of this is handled in this infrastructure that we're building in the back end. Okay? And so just to give you an example for what the architecture looks like that can handle something like this is the service integration architecture we have here. We are building a messaging platform and backbone into which all the different subsystems, sensors, the analysis tools, the data mining tools hook in. They receive messages from the system and then process these, so we can scale very easily by adding additional message recipients and message producers. But to handle policy, we look into all of the messages that are being exchanged across the platform, and we can reroute them at will. Okay? So this is one way in this architecture framework how we can ensure that only eligible parts of the system get to see data as it travels through our system. So the key to being scalable here is to build event-based systems that integrate multiple different services and allow for intersection and policy management across the various subsystems that we're trying to integrate. And because this is difficult, we have spun out a company called LonoCloud that sees the following market opportunity, and this is something that Dr. Matthews also alluded to. When you want to go to the market with a product, you first have to identify whether there is somebody who would want to buy it. Okay? If you can't find somebody who wants to buy it, it's better to do it only in your research lab, okay? If you can find a funding agency for it. Okay? But if you want to take it to the marketplace, you have to go out and find somebody who pays for this. And so the market opportunity here is that software development for the cloud remains challenging. The cloud, quote unquote, in a broad swath, is a roughly $15 billion market over the next 7 years. Okay? So there's a lot of money in this area, and still development for the cloud is very difficult. Okay? You will not find a single person who is happy with anything they see right now in the cloud. Technology is largely fragmented. Development and deployment platforms and vendors are heterogeneous. There is a strong lack of standards and tools and expectations for what the cloud can do, and the integration of legacy, meaning existing systems that are already out there, and emerging systems is very difficult. And so what we are trying to solve here is to have a cloud middleware software platform as a service, so that all the various device manufacturers, let's say somebody has a new sensor, they want to offer it not just to 10 people, 100 people, 1 million people, but 200 million people. They can write their applications on this platform, and then we will take care of the deployment, operation, and maintenance, and there will be a licensing fee of using the platform. Okay? So that's part of the business model that we are going after. And in the interest of time, because I can smell the coffee already, I just want to finish up by saying that the key elements are we need these cyber infrastructures. These cyber infrastructures are driven by very important requirements in the healthcare domain, and they are difficult to accomplish. This is not an easy task to accommodate these requirements. Flexibility, fluidity, scale, policy-based information assurance, availability, and cost effectiveness are the key targets we have. And I showed you a little bit of where the market opportunity for bringing a technology like this cloud middleware to the industry, to the marketplace lies. And I want to thank, obviously, everybody in my research group who's contributed to this, but also the Griswold and the CitiSense team, Kevin Patrick for Palms and Cycor, others here for the OOI, and so on and so forth, and of course my company. So, with that, thank you very much, and I'll be here for that.